I don't want to deal with that guy. I want that guy gone. Why are you bringing him into our city? There's no way that you want me to actually go and put my hands on the guy who literally wants to put his hands on me. He presses into God further to try and work through his skepticism, to see, am I hearing you correctly? We're looking at this person today called the skeptic, whose story is fascinating. And their willingness to kind of connect with God and grow and see what God has for them in that story is going to be something that we can figure out that can apply to our own lives. But before we dive into there, I want to tell you this story this morning by talking about one of my favorite guitar heroes. This guy, his name is Stevie Ray Vaughan. He's a massive blues musician from the 70s and 80s, and I love everything about him. I love the hat. I love the tacky shirt. I can't get enough of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I will listen to his music over and over and over. And if you have no idea who that is, that probably just means you're normal. He was this mainstream guitar player who helped bring about a blues revival in America in the 80s, right? So he had this, mainstay career of about 7 years in the public eye. And when he was in the public eye, he experienced all of the highs and the lows that come with being a musician in the 80s playing blues, right? He developed this massive drug and alcohol addiction. He started drinking when he was a little kid in Texas, and at the height of his addiction, it actually got so bad that he was drinking a quart of Crown Royal every day and taking up to a quarter ounce of cocaine every day. Yes, that is a lot, if you don't know. And so after playing a show one night, he gets ready to go out to do the encore, and as he's walking out to the stage, he collapses there, obviously from all of the drug intake. And so he's rushed to the hospital, and this doctor gives him 2 weeks to live. Just flatly says, Stevie, you're going to die. There's nothing that anybody can do for you. The only chance you would have is if you basically, totally rechanged your entire life. And I think it's at a point like this in a story like Stevie's where most of us would be able to say yeah, that sounds about right. Kind of par for the course of this person who's a famous musician. He turns to drugs and alcohol and ends up screwing up his life. Right? And we hear stories like this and we immediately default to our prejudices about people like this in this story, and we can write them off entirely. And so I want to ask you this morning, do you have anyone in your life that you know who's like this? Right? Maybe not like the prodigious guitar player part, right? But the idea of someone who you think of as too far gone. When I say the phrase wasted talent, who comes to mind for you? Please don't elbow anyone next to you, just in case, right? But take a moment and keep that name in your head, right? Maybe you've got some family member who's struggled with addiction of some kind. Or maybe you've got a boss who continually puts themselves in bad situations because of their poor leadership. Maybe still you have a child, right, that's far from God and constantly messing up in their life. And you find yourself just wanting to shake them and say, if you would turn back to Jesus, life would get so much better for you. Oftentimes we can think of these folks and we can look at them in their own mess and we can think to ourselves, right, they're the one who's constantly getting themselves into trouble. It's their fault. It's their mistake. It's their problem. And then we, on the other hand, we're over here trying to live our life, trying to do the right thing, raise a family, be a good spouse, employee, or boss. And you have to think after a certain amount of time, why is that person's problem any of my concern? Right? What role, to ask it another way, could God possibly want me to play in the life of that addict, of that screw up, of that unfaithful ex-spouse, of that whatever it might be, especially if their behavior is entirely contrary to your way of living? And so while you're thinking about that person this morning, I want to tell you about this series, right? We've been talking about the idea of these different folks that we may not know too much about historically, and we're filling these things in with some good cultural guesses based on the study that we've done and things that we know about the ancient world in their time. And this morning, we're going to be talking about a guy named Ananias who found himself in a scenario not too unlike what you may be thinking about right now. So as you hear Ananias' story, let's watch what he does, right? So we can get some guidance on what God might want to do in your life and in your situation. All right, so Ananias first shows up in verse 10 in the book of Acts chapter 9, and it reads like this. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. Here's our character. And the Lord calls to him in a vision, Ananias. And yes, Lord, he answered. All right, so right away, verse 10, we catch this guy, Ananias. He's our story's main character. And we know here that he's a disciple in the city of Damascus. And what we know about Damascus in Ananias' day is that it's a central hub for trade, for culture, for money, right? Damascus isn't this backwater town like Tracy, okay? Just kidding. Don't leave. I like Tracy. Instead, go the other way, right? Damascus is like San Francisco. It's a spot where people go to make their lives better, right? Food for their family, land, money, right? People go to Damascus to make a life for themselves. And additionally, we know from other parts in Acts that Ananias is a God-fearing man. He is well spoken of by other Jewish people in his city, and he is a faithful preacher. He talks about Jesus boldly in his town. And from this verse directly, we know that Ananias has a deep, beautiful relationship with the Lord, right? Because God can talk to Ananias and say, hey, Ananias. He goes, yes, God. It clearly indicates that there's some type of regular back and forth that Ananias has with the creator of the universe, right? He talks to God like God is a friend. And so Ananias is this incredible disciple. He loves God. He faithfully preaches about Jesus. He's a leader and a pillar in his Jewish Christian community in Damascus. Everything seems to be sailing smoothly for him until one day he learns about this horrific man who's coming to his town for a visit. This guy who's coming isn't looking to take in the local Damascus nightlife. Instead, the person coming in is an enemy of Ananias and all the other Jesus followers in his city. And one day, Ananias is in the temple. He's teaching other people how to follow Jesus, and he goes home. And he's sitting with his wife and his kids. They've just finished dinner. They're getting ready to sit down and talk about how their day was, how school was, how the animals are behaving. And then he just hears on his door. So he gets up, excuses himself from the table, and goes and opens the door, and it's his friends. And regularly, when he and his friends see each other, they're really excited to see each other. In fact, just a few hours prior in the day, they were sitting in the temple, hanging out together, learning about Jesus. But his friend is not excited to see him. His friend has this incredibly desperate look on his face. And he doesn't say anything. He just simply reaches into his pocket and hands Ananias a letter and turns around and walks away. And so, of course, Ananias opens the letter. And as he reads it, Ananias' whole demeanor changes. He develops this pit in his stomach. Because on that letter, he's alerted that there's a man coming to the town to find, hunt, and kill people like him. This man goes by the name of Saul. Now, Ananias knows who Saul is. Right? Saul doesn't know Ananias, but Ananias knows Saul, and Saul's reputation precedes him. You see, Ananias knows the position that Saul holds in the surrounding communities next to Damascus. He knows that Saul is this Jewish teacher called the Pharisee. And not only that, Saul is a Pharisee of Pharisees, which means like he is the dude of dudes. And Saul, on top of that, is convinced that people like Ananias, people who follow Jesus, need to be eliminated from the face of the earth because they are vile and dangerous and a threat to Saul in his way of life. See, at this point in his life, Ananias knows that Saul has been breathing murderous threats against Jesus' followers. He knows that Saul was even at the murder of his friend Stephen and caused the entire church in that city to flee into the surrounding communities. Heck, he remembers it vividly because it could very well be the reason that he and his family ended up in Damascus in the first place. And more than that, he knows that Saul isn't just some rogue leader who's kind of acting on his own volition. Right? Saul actually has the endorsement of the other Jewish leaders in his city. So Saul isn't coming just like on his own terms. Instead, he's been sanctioned to do this by other lawmakers in his community. He feels all of this dread. And Saul, meanwhile, is coming from Jerusalem to head over to Damascus to try and round up as many Jesus followers as he can to take them back and put them in prison. He is ecstatic about finding people to go and arrest. And then you compare that to where Ananias sits. Ananias has this pit in his stomach. We feel the tumult that he's walking through. He immediately falls to his knees and begins this dialogue with God. Lord, what am I supposed to do here, he says. How am I going to be able to help people get out of this situation? What does it look like for us to round up all of the Jesus followers that we can and go to a new city? God, why do we have to start over again? We were just getting settled here. What's going to happen to my wife? What's going to happen to my children? What's going to happen to me? Ananias brings all of this fear, all of this anger, all of this sorrow, and he takes it to Jesus because he has that capacity, because he's got that close relationship with God the Father. And he expects, hey, we're going to sneak out this way, right? We're going to do this. We're going to go here. He's hoping to hear from God. You can come out this way. You can find your way out. Or even more so, he's hoping to hear from God, hey, I'm just going to strike the guy dead. Right? And I was like, that would solve all of my problems. Please kill him, God. He's got this deep, deep fear. And so he brings that in to his prayer time with the Lord. All of those questions swirling around in his mind. And here's what God says to him. The Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. Strike one, God. I literally asked you for the thing, and you're telling me to do the opposite of the thing. I don't want to go to Straight Street. I don't want to go to Judas's house. I don't want to deal with that guy. I want that guy gone. Why are you bringing him into our city? Verse 12, in a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Strike two, God, because unless there's two Ananiases in here that I don't know of, I'm not going there. I don't know what you're thinking, but there's no way that you want me to actually go and put my hands on the guy who literally wants to put his hands on me. Verse 13, Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. All right, this is beautiful. Right, because this is Ananias saying like, hey, God, I don't know if you can see everything that's going on around here in Damascus, right? Like, I understand you're in heaven, that's very far away. You're in a different spot. Maybe some stuff gets lost in translation from the time zones from earth to heaven, whatever it is. But there is this guy named Saul, in case you didn't know, who is coming here to murder me and everyone I love. Ananias has simply been living his life following Jesus to the best of his ability. And then all of a sudden, he hears this story in his time with the Lord, that he's supposed to go do this thing. And as he presses into God further to try and work through his skepticism, to see, am I hearing you correctly? He hears this tale of Saul, who was on his own road to find people, to arrest them, who then encounters the risen Jesus, who's blinded by this powerful light, who has had a turn of heart and no longer wants to arrest